The click of the heavy oak door was the only sound that should have been in the house. It was 3 in the morning, a time when the world of Min-jun was supposed to be silent, orderly, and under his complete control. But tonight, a faint light bled from under the kitchen door, a pale yellow line against the dark marble floor. He stood in the grand hallway, a man carved from stillness, his presence a weight in the air that could bend steel. He had not built his empire on chance. He accounted for every variable, every soul under his roof. And this light was a variable he did not recognize. He moved without a sound, a phantom in his own home, and pushed the door open. There, under the soft glow of a single overhead lamp, was his maid. Her name was Amina. She was a large woman, her form substantial and strong in the light blue uniform she wore, the crisp white apron a stark contrast in the dimness. Her back was to him, her shoulders moving with a steady, practiced rhythm as she scrubbed a pot in the deep steel sink. The water ran softly, a gentle hiss that seemed to amplify the unnatural quiet of the hour. He watched her for a full minute, taking in the scene. She was supposed to be asleep in the staff quarters. Her shift had ended 9 hours ago. Yet here she was, working as if the sun were high in the sky, her movements weary but filled with a relentless purpose. What he did not yet understand was that this single act of quiet defiance was a declaration of war against a world he was about to tear apart for her. If you are new here, I would be honored if you subscribed to our channel for more stories like this. Now, let us get into it. Min-jun leaned against the doorframe, the shadow he cast stretching long and sharp into the room. He made no effort to hide his presence now, yet she did not startle. It was as if she had been expecting someone, or was too lost in her exhaustion to notice. "Amina," he said. His voice was low, not a question but a statement of fact. She paused, her hands still in the soapy water. Slowly she turned. Her face was round and kind, but etched with a fatigue that went deeper than a single sleepless night. There were dark circles under her eyes, a tension in her jaw that her soft features could not hide. "Mr. Kong," she replied, her voice soft but clear, carrying the gentle lilt of a southern upbringing. She made a move to dry her hands, a reflexive gesture of respect. He held up a hand, a subtle command to stop. "Why are you working?" he asked. The question was simple, direct. He dealt in truths, however unpleasant. Lies were an inefficiency he did not tolerate. "I couldn't sleep, sir," she said, her eyes not quite meeting his. "I thought I would make myself useful." It was a plausible answer. It was also a lie. He could feel the evasion in it, the careful wall she put up between her world and his. He walked further into the kitchen, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the polished tile. He stopped beside the vast granite island, his gaze sweeping over the already gleaming surfaces, the perfectly arranged spice racks, the spotless chrome of the appliances. The kitchen was already immaculate. Her extra labor served no purpose he could see. "The kitchen is clean," he stated. It was not clean enough, sir, he considered her. She stood her ground, respectful, but not subservient. In his world, people either feared him or wanted something from him. Amina seemed to do neither. She simply existed, a quiet, steady presence in the background of his life. He had hired her on the recommendation of his head housekeeper, Mrs. Park, who had vouched for her character with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. "A good woman," Mrs. Park had said. "Honest and strong." He was beginning to see the strength. It was in the set of her shoulders, the way she met a difficult moment without flinching. "Go to bed, Amina," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Your shift begins at 7. I expect you to be rested." She hesitated for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something, perhaps panic, in her eyes. But she simply nodded. "Yes, Mr. Kong. Good night, sir." She dried her hands on her apron, untied it, and hung it on its proper hook. As she walked past him to leave the kitchen, he caught the faint scent of lemon soap and something else, something like worry. He stayed in the kitchen long after she was gone. The silence she left behind louder than the sound of her scrubbing had ever been. He knew people. He knew desperation. And he had just seen it standing at his sink at 3 in the morning, pretending to be diligence. He now had a new variable to account for. And Min-jun always solved for his variables. The next morning, Min-jun summoned Mrs. Park to his study. The room was his sanctuary, paneled in dark wood and lined with books he never read, their presence a testament to a life he might have lived had he been born a different man. She stood before his desk, a small, bird-like woman whose loyalty was absolute. "You wish to see me, sir?" she asked. He gestured to the chair opposite him, a rare courtesy. "Tell me about Amina," he said, getting straight to the point. Mrs. Park's expression did not change, but he saw a protective flicker in her eyes. "She is an excellent worker, sir. Punctual, thorough, and very quiet. I found her washing dishes at 3 this morning." The statement hung in the air. Mrs. Park's composure was perfect. "She suffers from insomnia at times, sir. She says working helps calm her mind." It was the same story. A coordinated defense. He leaned forward, his hands steepled on the polished mahogany. "Mrs. Park, you have been with my family for 30 years. You know I value honesty above all else. Tell me what you know." The housekeeper held his gaze for a long moment. She was one of the few people not truly afraid of him. She respected the power, but she had known him since he was a boy who hid in the kitchen to steal sweet rice cakes. "She is a private person, sir. She has burdens. A younger brother." "What about her brother?" "He is not well," she said, her voice dropping. "She is all he has. She sends every dollar she earns to him. She works extra shifts at a diner in town after she leaves here. I do not know how she stands on her feet." Minjun processed this. It explained the exhaustion, but not the desperation. Not the 3 a.m. scrubbing. A sick family member was a common story. But there was something more here. "Is that all?" Mrs. Park hesitated. "She was a student, a brilliant one, I am told. She had a scholarship to the top architectural program in the country. She gave it up. For him, an architect." He pictured her hands, strong and capable in the soapy water, and tried to imagine them drafting blueprints, designing buildings that touched the sky. The image did not fit, yet it felt true. He dismissed the housekeeper, his mind already moving several steps ahead. He had his own people, men who could find a whisper in a hurricane. He made a single phone call. The instructions were simple: find out everything about Amina and her brother, Samuel. He wanted to know their history, their debts, their enemies. He wanted the entire shape of the burden she carried. Over the next few days, he watched her. He was a man who noticed details others missed. He saw how she would wrap up leftover bread and vegetables from the staff meals, tucking them carefully into her bag. He noticed the worn-out soles of her shoes. And one afternoon, he saw her through the window, sitting on a bench in the garden during her short break, not resting, but reading. She held a thick, battered textbook in her lap, her finger tracing lines and diagrams he could not make out from a distance. It was a book she handled with the care a person gives to a holy text or to the last remnant of a lost dream. The report arrived in a plain manila envelope, delivered by a man with no name and a face that revealed nothing. Minjun opened it in his study, the evening light casting long shadows across the room. The pages were filled with the stark, black and white facts of Amina's life. Her parents, gone in a car accident 5 years prior. Her sole guardianship of her brother, Samuel, who was 17. And the reason she had given up her dream. Samuel had been diagnosed with a rare, aggressive form of muscular dystrophy. The prognosis was poor, the treatments financially catastrophic. The file contained a copy of her acceptance letter to the university, alongside the letter she had written to defer her admission indefinitely, citing a family emergency. Every line he read added another layer to the woman he saw polishing his silver. She was not just a maid. She was a guardian, a provider, a protector. She had sacrificed her future for his. But the report contained something else, something that made the cold knot of anger in his stomach tighten. The treatments were being administered by a private clinic run by a man named Silas Thorne. The name was unfamiliar, but the business model was not. The clinic was not covered by any insurance. It demanded cash payments, weekly, at a rate that was impossibly high. It preyed on the desperate, offering slivers of hope at the price of utter financial ruin.
Mignon noemen like Silas.
They were vultures who feasted on the suffering of others. That evening, he walked through the house, a restless energy moving him from room to room. He found himself in the West Wing, in a small library she was responsible for cleaning. She was there, carefully dusting a row of leather-bound classics. As he entered, she was reaching for a book on a higher shelf. Tucked behind it, almost completely hidden, was another book. Her textbook. He watched as she took it down, her movements gentle, almost reverent. She opened it, and for a moment, the weary maid disappeared. In her place was a young woman lost in a world of angles, stress points, and elegant design. She did not see him standing in the doorway. She saw only the dream she had been forced to lock away. He said nothing, backing away as silently as he had arrived. He now understood the source of her desperation. It was not just about paying for medicine. It was a race against time, a battle against a predator who was bleeding her dry, 1 week at a time. And she was losing. The quiet strength he had admired was the armor she wore in a war she could not possibly win alone. Amina's world began to shrink. The phone calls from Silas became more frequent, his voice a slick, venomous thing that dripped poison into her ear. "The payment is late, Amina," he would say, his tone falsely sympathetic. "You know Samuel's treatment is delicate. It requires consistency." She would stand in the staff break room, the phone pressed hard against her ear, her knuckles white. "I'll have it by Friday," she would whisper, her own voice sounding hollow and distant. "I promise," but promises were becoming harder to keep. She had sold the last piece of her mother's jewelry, a simple gold locket, for a fraction of its worth. The money had covered 1 more week, a temporary reprieve that felt more like a tightening noose. She took on more work, picking up extra cleaning jobs in the neighborhood after her shifts at the mansion and the diner. Sleep became a luxury she could no longer afford. She moved through her days in a fog of exhaustion, her body aching with a fatigue so profound it felt like it had settled in her bones. One evening, as she was leaving the mansion, 2 men were waiting for her just outside the main gate. They were large and dressed in cheap suits, their faces impassive. They didn't touch her. They didn't have to. "Mr. Thorne sends his regards," one of them said, his voice flat. "He's looking forward to seeing you on Friday. Don't disappoint him." They got back into their car and drove away, leaving her standing on the pavement, her heart hammering against her ribs. The threat was no longer on the phone. It was here, at the edge of her sanctuary, a place of order and safety. They were showing her that they knew where she worked, that they could reach her anywhere. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the wall of her exhaustion. She felt a wave of dizziness and leaned against the cold stone of the gatepost to steady herself. What they did not know was that they were also being watched. From a darkened window on the 2nd floor of the mansion, Min-jun had seen the entire exchange on a security monitor. He saw the black sedan pull up. He saw the men get out. He saw the fear on Amina's face, a stark, pale mask in the twilight. He watched until she straightened up, took a deep breath, and began her long walk to the bus stop, her shoulders squared as if carrying an invisible, crushing weight. He turned from the monitor, his face a mask of cold fury. This was an insult. These animals had brought their filth to his doorstep. They had threatened someone under his roof. They had underestimated him. More than that, they had underestimated her. They saw a poor, desperate maid. They did not see the woman who had given up a universe for her brother. They did not see the quiet dignity of a warrior. He picked up his phone. "Find Silas Thorne," he said to the man on the other end. "I want to know where he sleeps. And I want the 2 men who were just at my gate. Bring them to me." The hunt had begun. Later that night, Min-jun found her again. Not in the kitchen, but in the large walk-in pantry, surrounded by shelves of spices and dry goods. The door was slightly ajar, and he heard a sound, a choked, desperate sob she was trying to smother. He pushed the door open. She was slumped on a small stool, her face buried in her hands, her broad shoulders shaking. The formidable strength she projected had finally cracked, and in its place was a raw, heartbreaking vulnerability. She looked up as he entered, her eyes wide with alarm and shame at being seen this way. She quickly wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, trying to pull her composure back around her like a shield. "Mr. Kong," she stammered.
"I'm sorry."
"I was just—" He did not press her for an explanation. He simply walked to the small staff refrigerator, took out a bottle of cold water, and handed it to her. He then pulled a clean, folded handkerchief from his pocket and offered it. She took them both, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against his. The gesture was simple, impersonal, yet in the sterile silence of their employer-employee relationship, it felt profound. They sat in silence for a moment, the only sounds the hum of the refrigerators and her quiet, ragged breaths. "In my study," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. I saw a book. About buildings. She looked up, confused by the sudden change of subject. Yes, sir. You enjoy architecture? It was a ridiculously inadequate word for what he knew it meant to her. She looked down at the handkerchief in her hands. I used to, she said quietly. I liked to draw. I liked the idea that you could make something permanent, something strong that could shelter people. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of a life unlived. He saw it then, the architect behind the apron. He saw the mind that could visualize soaring structures, the spirit that understood the meaning of sanctuary. She was trying to be a shelter for her brother, but her own foundations were crumbling. They will not bother you again, he said. It was not a reassurance. It was a promise. She looked at him, her tear-filled eyes searching his face for meaning. She didn't ask who they were. She didn't ask how he knew. In that moment, some unspoken truth passed between them. She was in a world of trouble, and he was a man who solved problems. You should not involve yourself, Mr. Kong, she whispered, a last stand of pride. This is my burden to carry. Some burdens are not meant to be carried alone, he replied. He stood up, leaving her with the water and the handkerchief. He had seen what he needed to see. Her tears were not a sign of weakness. They were the measure of her love, and he would not allow that love to be used as a weapon against her. Minjun stood in the security office, a sterile room filled with the cold, blue glow of 24 monitors. He had watched the footage from the front gate over and over. He saw the moment Amina's practiced calm shattered, the brief, unguarded terror that crossed her face. It was all the declaration of war he needed. He turned to his head of security, a man named Choi who had been with him for a decade. The men from the car?
Minjun asked.
They are waiting, sir, Choi replied. Minjun walked out of the office and down a sterile corridor to a concrete room in the sub-basement of the estate. The two men from the gate were there, kneeling, their cheap suits now rumpled and stained. They looked up as he entered, their earlier arrogance replaced by a primal fear. They knew who he was. They had been fools to come to his home. He circled them slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His stillness was more terrifying than any threat. You came to my home, he said, his voice a low murmur. You threatened a member of my staff, a woman who is under my protection. This was a mistake. You will tell me everything you know about Silas Thorne, his operation, his weaknesses, his fears. They talked. They told him everything, their words tumbling out in a desperate flood. Thorne was a grifter, a former medical supply salesman who had found a more lucrative trade in peddling false hope. He targeted families with rare diseases, offering them access to exclusive, experimental treatments that were nothing more than expensive vitamin drips and placebo pills. He bled them of their savings, their homes, everything they had, and when the money ran out, he cut them off. He was a parasite of the highest order. Minjun listened without expression. When they were finished, he gave a simple nod to Choi. The men were removed. They would not be troubling anyone again. His focus was now singular, Silas Thorne. Later that day, he called Amina to his study. She entered cautiously, her face composed but her eyes wary. Sit, he commanded gently. She sat on the edge of the leather chair. I need a name, Amina, he said, his voice calm and level. The man you are paying. The one who sent his dogs to my gate. She shook her head, her jaw set stubbornly. I cannot. This is my family's problem. I will not bring trouble to you, sir. He admired her loyalty, her fierce instinct to protect, even to protect him from the mess she was in. But her defiance was now a liability, an obstacle to her own salvation. You mistake my position, he said, his voice hardening slightly. This is no longer your problem alone. It became my problem when they set foot on my property. They disrespected this house. They disrespected me. And that is a debt that will be paid. Tell me his name. She looked at him, a conflict raging in her eyes. The instinct to protect her secret warred with a terrifying authority in front of her. His name is Thorne, she finally whispered, the name tasting like ash in her mouth.
Silas Thorne, Minjun nodded slowly.
Thank you, Amina. That is all I needed. You may go. She left the study, unsure if she had just made a terrible mistake or if she had been rescued. She did not know that the tide of her war had already turned. The full, unstoppable force of Minjun's world was now aimed like a spear at the heart of one Silas Thorne. That night, Silas Thorne was enjoying a glass of overpriced scotch in his penthouse apartment, admiring the city lights. He felt untouchable, a king in his castle built on the tears of the desperate. His comfort was shattered when his door dissolved inward, the locks exploding from the frame. Two of Minjun's men, silent and efficient, stepped inside. Silas barely had time to stand before they were on him. They did not beat him. They were professionals. They simply subdued him and escorted him from his luxury apartment, down to a waiting black car. He was taken to a place the city had forgotten, a vast, empty warehouse on the industrial waterfront. The air smelled of salt and rust. Minjun was waiting for him, sitting on a simple wooden chair in the center of the cavernous space, illuminated by the single, harsh glare of a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. Silas was forced to his knees before him. He was a man accustomed to wielding fear, but now he was drowning in it. Minjun looked down at him, his expression unreadable. "Silas Thorne," he said, the name an accusation. "You have been a busy man. You run a clinic. You give people hope. And you take their money. I provide a service," Silas stammered, his bravado gone. "Amina," Minjun continued, as if Silas hadn't spoken. "You have been taking her money for her brother, Samuel. You have been threatening her. You sent your men to my home." Silas's face went pale. I didn't know she worked for you. It was a mistake. A misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, Minjun said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more chilling than a shout. You are a worm that feeds on decay. You took a good woman's hope and you turned it into a weapon against her. You took her dream of a future and you sold it back to her one drop at a time. He stood up and walked over to Silas, crouching down so they were face to face. Here is what will happen now. Her debt is canceled. You will return every dollar she has ever paid you. You will then liquidate your assets, all of them. The money will be placed in a fund for the families you have scammed. Your clinic is closed, effective immediately. And you'll disappear. If I ever hear your name again, if you ever so much as breathe in the same city as her, I will find you. Minjun stood and walked away without a backward glance. He did not need to see the aftermath. His orders would be followed. As he stepped out into the cold night air, he felt no satisfaction, only a quiet, simmering rage at the injustice of it all. He had solved the immediate problem. He had removed the predator. But the deeper wound remained. He had saved her from the wolf, but her brother was still lost in the woods. Here is the part of the story you have not been told. The part that changed everything for Minjun, turning a simple act of protection into a mission of personal redemption. 20 years ago, when he was just a boy, his own mother had fallen ill. It was a rare neurological condition, one the doctors knew little about. They had watched her fade, a vibrant, laughing woman reduced to a fragile whisper in a hospital bed. His father, a man of immense power even then, had thrown all his resources at the problem. He had flown in specialists from around the world, funded experimental treatments, and chased every rumor of a cure. But none of it had worked. She had died, and a part of Minjun had died with her. The loss had hollowed him out, replacing a boy's warmth with a man's cold resolve. In her memory, his father had established a private, anonymous foundation. Its sole purpose was to fund cutting-edge research into the very disease that had taken her. It was a quiet, secret war against the ghost that haunted their family.
Minjun now ran that foundation.
It was the one part of his life that was untouched by the darkness of his other business. It was his penance, his one truly good act in a life defined by shades of gray. After dealing with Silas, he had his people send him Samuel's full medical file. As he read the diagnosis, a cold dread washed over him. It was not the same disease as his mother's, but it was in the same family of degenerative conditions. It was a cousin to the ghost he had been fighting his entire adult life. He went to the rundown facility where Samuel was being kept. It was less a clinic and more a hospice, a place of quiet despair. He saw the boy, pale and thin in his bed, but his eyes were bright, intelligent. He spoke to the attending physician, a tired, overworked man who confirmed Silas's scam. The treatments were saline drips, but the doctor also confirmed the diagnosis was real. There's no cure, the doctor said, his voice heavy with resignation. But there is a new research trial, a gene therapy. It's showing incredible promise. But it's years away from public use, and the cost is astronomical. It's being funded by some anonymous foundation. Minjun stood there, the world tilting on its axis. The foundation. His foundation. The research he had been pouring millions into for years, the one tangible link to his mother's memory, had produced the one thing in the world that could save Amina's brother. He had not just stumbled upon a maid in trouble. He had been led to a crossroads where his past and his present converged, offering him a chance to do for her what his father could never do for his mother, to bring someone back from the brink. Minjun moved with a speed and efficiency that bordered on miraculous. Within hours, Samuel was transferred by private ambulance from the dreary clinic to the finest neurological hospital in the country, the one that partnered directly with his foundation. He was immediately enrolled in the clinical trial, his care overseen by the world's leading expert on his condition. The full cost was covered, funneled anonymously through the foundation. No one would ever connect the city's feared underworld boss to the act of quiet charity. His work done, he returned to the mansion late that night. The house was still and dark, just as it had been the night this all began. He went to the kitchen, half expecting to find her there, scrubbing away a phantom debt. She was there, but she was not working. She was sitting at the small staff table, her head resting on her folded arms, fast asleep. She was utterly spent, the last of her adrenaline having finally left her. The architecture textbook was on the table beside her. He walked over and gently touched her shoulder. She started awake, her eyes wide and disoriented. "Mr. Kong," she said, sitting up straight. "I'm so sorry, I must have." "Your brother is safe," he said, cutting her off. His voice was gentle. "He has been moved to a new hospital. He is getting the best care in the world. You have nothing to worry about anymore." Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were not tears of fear or exhaustion. They were tears of disbelief, of a hope so overwhelming it was painful. "How?" she whispered. "Who?" He pushed the textbook gently across the table toward her. "The past is taken care of," he said. "Now we must talk about the future." Your future, he had made another call that day, a call to the university admissions office. He had spoken to the dean. He had made a very generous, anonymous donation to the architectural program. "They are still holding your scholarship," he told her, his dark eyes holding hers. "They're willing to reinstate it. You will start in the fall semester. All your tuition and living expenses will be covered." She stared at him, speechless. She tried to form words, to protest, to ask why, but no sound would come out. "You will no longer work for me, Amina," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You will not scrub my floors or wash my dishes. You will go to school. You will learn to build things. You will work for yourself. You will build the life you were meant to have." He placed an envelope on the table. It contained the money Silas Thorne had stolen from her, and more. Enough to ensure she and her brother would never have to worry again. He had taken her burden, and in its place, he had given her back her dream. 6 months passed. The leaves on the trees in the mansion gardens turned from green to gold, then fell, and were replaced by the stark white of winter snow. A new maid worked in the kitchen, a polite and efficient young woman who was never there at 3 in the morning. Minjun's life returned to its previous state of quiet, ruthless order. He never spoke of Amina, and no one dared ask. It was as if she had been a dream. But sometimes, late at night, he would find himself walking past the kitchen and pausing, remembering the sight of her standing at the sink, her quiet strength a beacon in the darkness. One afternoon, a package arrived for him. It was a long, flat box, wrapped in simple brown paper with no return address. He opened it in his study. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a framed drawing. It was a charcoal and ink sketch of his mansion, but rendered with an artist's eye. The drawing captured not just the building's grand architecture, but its soul. It caught the way the morning light hit the east-facing windows, the strength in the old stone, the sense of it being a fortress, a sanctuary. It was breathtaking. In the bottom right corner, in small, elegant script, were 2 initials. A. W. Tucked into the back of the frame was a small, folded note. He opened it. The note was simple.
"Thank you," it read.
"I am building things." He placed the drawing on the mantelpiece in his study, where it could catch the light. It was a reminder, a promise fulfilled. He had torn down a corrupt man's world to rebuild hers. He had paid a debt he didn't owe to a past that was not his. He looked at the sketch, at the strong, clean lines of the home he lived in, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something like peace. The architect had given the fortress a heart. The story of their two worlds, colliding in the dead of night in a quiet kitchen, was now complete. A life of service had been transformed into a life of creation, all because a man of power chose to see the person, not the position. What do you think is the most powerful act of kindness one person can do for another? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you enjoyed our story, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more. We will see you in the next one.